Captains of Industry, brought to you by Airtel.
Our guest today has been described as a woman who's strong, yet graceful. She's a woman who's had to fight very tough battles, especially over her candidacy to lead Business Unity South Africa. Being one of a handful of black and female accountants, she's also had to break many barriers created by perception and also history. Futhi Mtoba is the chairman of Deloitte Southern Africa and also president of Business Unity SA, and she's our captain of industry tonight. Thanks so much for your time. Now, it's almost 1 year since you became president of BUSA, and we all know how very difficult and controversial that election process was. In hindsight, was it right for you to take the job?
Definitely right. I think it was the best thing that I ever did, and also it was the right time that I did it. Having been in organized business or involved as president of the Association of Black Accountants, doing a much more broader role in the country and possibly in the continent was the right thing for me to do.
And emotionally, have you healed? Because you just found yourself being the subject of so much vitriol, particularly from the Black Management Forum. You know, some people even suggested that you're not black enough to represent a new South Africa.
I think what happens is that you grow. You know, you grow, you ask yourself questions, and then you focus your attention on the job on hand, because South Africa is going through a very exciting period. We have to make decisions that are going to improve the livelihood of many people, and to be in that space and to lead a business organization like BUSA whilst it's going through that phase is just almost overwhelming and quite exciting.
Have you made overtures, though, to the BMF and said to them, let bygones be bygones, let's focus on these ideas?
Well, we did that immediately after the whole space, and we continued focusing on what needed to be done.
Now, business is a critical constituency in the development of this post-apartheid economy, but it's always been a very difficult relationship between government and business and workers in terms of what we all embrace as ideals for a changing economy. What role do you think BUSA should be playing at this juncture in the history?
Because of what we have to do, and as all organizations, you have to relook at your strategies to assess your relevance in any particular space. We also took time and produced a 75-page document looking at how can business contribute to job creation, to addressing all the social challenges that our country has. What that requires is that each partner will have to make choices and sacrifices. And that will require a give and take. And all the stakeholders, government and labor and business, understand that that is what is required from all of us to rise above all these challenges.
You're emphasizing partnership, but often business feels it's not partnership, they're being driven into a corner. We've got this new growth path, for instance, 5 million jobs in the next 10 years, focus on labor-intensive industries, incentivizing business to hire young, unskilled people. There's a lot of expectation on the part of government by way of business sorting out a lot of problems, and yet business is saying, what's the role of the government then? Create the enabling conditions, we'll invest. But don't put the entire burden on the shoulder of business. Does business feel that you're now being made to fix all problems?
I think we have to caution against feeling we have to fix all. I think what we are called upon is also to do our role. Maybe the expectations are too high, then that becomes our role to say, whereas we all understand this ambitious plan of creating 5 million jobs, because we all do, let's talk about the steps that get us there, and let's agree on those steps. And that is where, you know, the challenges are going to be. We can't expect one stakeholder to do all. For us as business, what we are requiring from government is government should create the enabling environment, look at the issues that make business thrive, like creating a competitive environment. And that requires a lot of conversation then between labor, government and ourselves.
Is business unified in their understanding and appreciation of South Africa's problems? Some people will say the big issue is labor, politicized labor force in South Africa. Others will say it's education and skills. Others will say it's infrastructure. Do you all see the issues in the same way?
I think South Africa understands the issues. In fact, even these documents by the National Planning Commission came out with the same issues that we all understand. What has been our major challenge is the implementation of the strategies that we take, we come up with to address these issues. So there is a common understanding, for an example, that unless we decisively deal or address the education challenge, we will forever be fixing around the skills, because you need the human capital to do all the things that we need to happen in our country. Without the right human capital, you will not achieve the growth level that we need. Because if you are going into a labor-intensive environment, it means your human capital must also be prepared accordingly to fit into that. So, yeah, we all understand the challenges, but the real conversation has to be around how do we get there. And that will require each one of us making sacrifices and choices.
Now, in addition to being president of BUSA, you're chairman of Deloitte Southern Africa, a chartered accountant. What's it like operating in an environment where post-credit crisis, there have been issues around governance, there have been issues around corporate greed, there have been so many infractions, particularly in Europe and the United States. It must have been a challenging time for accountants the world over.
Being in that environment is exceptionally exciting. I think I always believe that I made the right choice by being there. Firstly, because the youngsters that come and join us in the environment every year, they keep us young, or at least feeling young. And then if you look at what has happened globally around the financial crisis, it's been quite challenging for everybody. Because if you think of the accounting profession, we first had the Enron, and then we were just recovering from that, from the regulation that were imposed post that episode. Now you have the financial crisis, which is now coming up with a whole lot of set of regulations. So it keeps us as a profession very much engaged as well.
How does South Africa fare, do you think? We're always told that our banks fared better than the others globally because we already had a fairly rigid regulatory environment. We already had conversations around the king codes of governance, for instance. So we've already had an overarching system that
we
tries
also
to create
had the
norms
Credit
and
Act.
So do you think South Africa is in good stead?
Well, in terms of our own regulations, we really were well placed. We had done the right thing. We had applied. Of course, we have to give credit to the regulators for doing this. But what happened was, because our markets were the West, we felt the secondary effects of the financial crisis. So what that did to us, we grew as a continent and as a country. We started understanding you cannot be trading with a single partner. You must diversify who you buy from and who you sell to, in order so that whatever happens in those geographies, it doesn't impact you significantly.
I think the reason I'm asking this is because we may have a system that supports good governance standards, but do we have a culture that embraces good governance standards? When you read South African newspapers, stories of public sector corruption are overwhelming. And obviously we scrutinize the government because we're taxpayers, but we're also told the rot that exists in the private sector is tremendous. So as auditors, as accountants, you're supposed to be the eyes and ears of the shareholders, of the public in managing a lot of these funds.
Well, if you look at the issue of crime, corruption in South Africa, it's actually is worrying. I mean, if what we read in the papers has to, we can go about what we read from the newspaper. It is very worrying. That is why, from BUSA's perspective, we've also set aside. We have business working group, an anti-corruption business working group, which is also trying to focus on how does business play their role in preventing corruption, because as you can understand, there's always two players in a corruption. There's a corruptee and a corrupter. And we want to say that let's try and create an environment such that it is not possible to have the corruption. So we participate in that regard in the National Anti-Corruption Forum, which is a collective action between government, civil society, and business, where each sector has to look at their own corrupt practices and try and do something about trying to stop that corruption.
I mean, whilst you're trying to create a framework within Business Unity SA, how are you going to deal with the mindset? How do you respond to people who say, Africa, including South Africa, business is inherently corrupt?
I think, Eliratu, we will never get over the corruption perception unless at a practical level we begin to demonstrate that. In fact, currently from BUSA, we are trying to talk to government and also to civil society to say, let's do this on a transaction-to-transaction basis. And we are looking at how to practice collective action through probably using integrity packs and using international examples whereby tender processes were transparent and were monitored. Because examples, for instance, in Germany shows us that when on one such a tender, when they have integrity packs, they were able to not only stem out corruption on that particular transaction, but they were also able to save government the price of the contract itself, reduce significantly. So there's a lot of benefits for everybody if we act collectively.